A cop bullied black men for years behind her badge, but when she targeted Derek Rowe, he turned her world upside down in court. The air was dry and the sky over Macon, Georgia hung low with heat. Derek Rowe was driving his rental car along Pine Street, just a few blocks from his mother's house. He had a grocery bag riding shotgun, milk, a loaf of bread, her favorite lemon cookies. His weekend back home was supposed to be simple, quiet. He hadn't been back in almost a year, but everything still looked the same, at least on the outside. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The patrol car behind him had been tailing him for about 5 blocks now. He slowed a little, turned his signal on, and changed lanes, hoping the cruiser would keep moving. It didn't. Lights flashed. Siren chirped once. Derek sighed. "Here we go," he muttered, pulling over calmly. The patrol car door opened. Out stepped Officer Karen Delacroix, mid-40s, blonde, stiff posture, mirrored sunglasses. She moved like someone who knew she'd be obeyed. She placed one hand on her holster as she approached. "License and registration," she said flatly. Derek kept his hands on the wheel. "Sure, just gonna reach into my glove compartment." "Nice and slow," she snapped. He moved deliberately, handed over the documents. "What brings you to this part of town?" "My mother lives 2 blocks away," he replied. She raised an eyebrow. "This car's rented." "It is. I flew in from Seattle yesterday." Karen stared at him for a second too long. "Step out of the vehicle," Derek blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Step out of the vehicle," she repeated. He obeyed, hands visible, confusion growing. She began circling him slow, like she was inspecting merchandise. "You fit the description of a suspect involved in a robbery this morning. Stay right there." "I've been at my mother's house all morning," Derek said. "You're welcome to check." She didn't respond. Instead, she called it in on her radio, something about backup. He shook his head. "Officer, look, I know my rights. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'd like to know—" "Put your hands on the hood," she barked. He hesitated. "Are you seriously detaining me?" She walked up and shoved him. "Hands, now." Something shifted in Derek's face. Not fear, not anger, just disappointment. He turned and placed his palms on the hot metal of the car. Her hands searched him roughly. "I'm a consultant," he said over his shoulder. "I work with Fortune 500s. I don't carry weapons, drugs, or anything else you think I might have." "Don't talk," she said. "You're making it worse for yourself." The second patrol car arrived. Another officer stepped out. Hernandez, younger, more cautious. Karen briefed him quietly. He didn't look convinced, but kept quiet. She cuffed Derek anyway. "On what charge?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Resisting arrest," she said. "I didn't resist." "You raised your voice." "Step toward me." "No," Derek replied. "I asked a question. You just didn't like it." Her jaw set. She pushed him into the back of her car. As they drove toward the station, Derek sat still. His phone buzzed inside his pocket, probably his mom wondering where he was. He thought about the groceries melting in the sun, about the last time he saw someone cuffed for no reason. It hadn't ended well. He wasn't scared. He was tired. Tired of people like her. Tired of proving himself. Tired of standing still while someone else rewrote the story. At the station, they took his mug shot. Cold walls, sterile smell, a clipboard shoved at him without explanation. Karen filled out the report. The words on the page were like a script she'd written before. Aggressive, threatening posture, raised voice, non-compliant. But something about this one felt different. He hadn't cracked, he hadn't begged, he hadn't panicked. He'd looked her straight in the eye, and that unsettled her more than she'd admit. But this wouldn't go the way she thought. Not this time. They kept him overnight. No phone call, no explanation, just a hard bench, a fluorescent light that buzzed, and the occasional muffled voice behind the desk. Derek sat still, head leaned against the wall, his wrists sore from the cuffs. He wasn't panicking, he was analyzing, thinking through the next move like he would for a client back in Seattle. Only this wasn't about numbers or contracts. This was personal. At 7:13 a.m., the door opened. A different officer walked in, older, gray around the temples, holding a clipboard. He looked at Derek like he wasn't sure what kind of man sat in front of him. "You're being charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest," he said. "Bail hearing set for this afternoon." Derek stared at him. "I didn't resist. I didn't obstruct anything. I was pulled over for no reason." The officer looked uncomfortable. "It's all in the report." "I'd like to see the report." You'll need your lawyer for that. Then, I'll call one. They gave him one call. He called Marvin Bexley, a former law school buddy turned criminal defense attorney based in Augusta. They hadn't spoken in years, but Marvin answered on the third ring. 30 minutes later, Marvin was already en route. Sit tight, he said before hanging up. I'll handle it. Karen Delacroix watched from her desk as Marvin walked in that afternoon, smooth and focused in a navy suit. She recognized the type, big city lawyer with a clipboard and a quiet attitude that said, "Try me." She didn't like it. She didn't like him. She sat down across from him and smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm representing Mr. Rowe," he said calmly. "I'm here to see the arrest footage and the incident report." Her fingers tapped the desk. "That's internal. We'll release it to the court." Marvin leaned in slightly. "If you're confident in your story, officer, I'd imagine you wouldn't mind me taking a look now." She met his stare but didn't answer. Derek was released on bail 2 hours later. Karen watched him walk out of the station with Marvin at his side, and something in her stomach twisted. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He just looked determined. That night, Karen sat in her apartment staring at her report. The language was clean, practiced. Suspect failed to comply with verbal commands, became verbally aggressive, made sudden movement toward officer. Nothing she hadn't written before. She opened her laptop, clicked on the dash cam footage, watched it play out, and paused when she saw herself shove him. She sat back, eyes on the screen, then quietly closed the lid and walked away. Across town, Marvin and Derek sat in the living room of a short-term rental, scrolling through paperwork. "She filed it like clockwork," Marvin said. "It's a pattern. She's done this before." "Yeah, I've already found 2 complaints. One was sealed, one dismissed, but both from black men, both within the past 5 years. Derek leaned forward. "I'm not letting this go." "You sure about that?" "Yes, people like her count on silence." "I'm not built for silence," Marvin nodded. "All right then, we start with a subpoena for that dash cam. I'll file first thing in the morning." Meanwhile, Karen showed up to her shift the next day, chin high, eyes steely, but inside she felt it, a sliver of something she hadn't experienced in years: doubt. It followed her into every call, every traffic stop, every glance from another officer. She'd told herself for years that her instincts were sharp, that she could sense trouble, but this wasn't instinct. This was something else. Something uglier. Still, she doubled down, told herself she'd done the right thing, that Derek's lawyer was just trying to make a name for himself, but that confidence wouldn't last, because somebody was about to speak up, someone who remembered what she thought they'd forget. The courthouse in Bibb County didn't look like much, just a long building with beige stone, thick windows, and the weight of years. It had seen divorces, land disputes, custody fights, and now the arrest of a man who never should have been in cuffs to begin with. Marvin filed the motion to suppress the dashcam footage, along with a formal complaint requesting a full investigation into Officer Delacroix's conduct. A court date was set for preliminary hearings just 2 weeks out. Karen sat in her cruiser when she got the news. The radio crackled in the background as her eyes stayed on the folded court notice. She felt her throat tighten. Not fear, just pressure. The kind that builds behind your eyes when something you buried starts pushing its way up. She folded the paper and put the car in drive. Derek, on the other hand, was methodical. Back at Marvin's office in Augusta, he sifted through old news clippings, public complaints, body cam footage, reports, anything tied to Delacroix. "That's her," Marvin asked, handing over an old article from 2019. Derek nodded. "Let me guess. Black kid, wrong place, matching a description?" "Exactly. 18 years old, college-bound. Ended up with a broken wrist after resisting a sidewalk stop, and nothing came of it. Family didn't press, no lawyer, he just wanted to be left alone." Derek set the article down. "That ends here. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, is that someone else was watching the case closely. A woman named Raina Blunt, who worked at the courthouse as a clerk. She'd grown up in the same neighborhood where Karen had started patrolling. Raina remembered how things used to go down, how certain people got pulled over again and again for nothing more than walking home. And she remembered her own brother, Andre, locked up at 17 for obstructing a public officer. Same language, same pattern, same badge. So when Raina saw Derek's name attached to Officer Delacroix, something clicked. She didn't reach out to the police. She didn't go to the press. She went to Marvin. They met after hours in the back corner of a cafe near downtown. "I know what she's been doing," Raina said. "And I'm not the only one," Marvin leaned in. "You're willing to talk?" "I'll testify. I'll say everything I saw and heard. The stuff we were told to file and forget. I kept copies. Names, dates." Derek stared at her. "Why now?" Raina's eyes didn't flinch. "Because I should have said something 5 years ago, and I'm tired of feeling like I helped cover it." Her words hung in the air. Marvin didn't say anything right away. He just nodded slowly. "All right, then we'll file a motion to include your statement." That night, Karen pulled into her driveway and killed the engine. Her porch light flickered. The neighborhood felt quieter than usual. Inside, she peeled off her uniform and turned on the news. She nearly dropped her remote when she saw her own name scrawl across the bottom of the screen. "Officer facing misconduct inquiry after questionable traffic stop." It was local coverage, brief, but it hit hard. She turned the TV off. Next morning at roll call, she noticed the shift in the room. A few colleagues avoided eye contact. One or two gave her tight, polite greetings. Even Hernandez, who'd backed her up during the arrest, barely said a word. Her supervisor asked to speak with her privately after the meeting. Door closed, voice low. "We're placing you on restricted duty until the hearing." Karen stiffened. "I followed protocol. We'll let the court decide that." She walked out of the room, feeling like the air had changed. It wasn't just her department anymore. It was her name in people's mouths, her story under the microscope, and something in her gut told her this time she might actually lose. But she still thought she could spin it, until the footage finally hit the courtroom. News traveled faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, Derek's face was everywhere. Local papers, radio shows, social media pages. Some headlines painted him as a professional with a spotless record, a son visiting his elderly mother who'd been wrongfully arrested. Others clung to Karen's side of the story, describing him as non-compliant and agitated. The town split right down the middle. At Dee's barbershop on MLK Boulevard, older men gathered like they did every Saturday. Clippers buzzed. Debates ran hot. "I know Derek, grew up 2 houses down from his mama," one said. "He never gave nobody trouble. If he says she went too far, she went too far." But others weren't so sure. A younger man in the corner leaned back in the chair. "Cops don't pull you over for nothing." An older voice shot back, "Son, you just too young to remember." Churches started whispering. Teachers swapped stories in break rooms. A retired mechanic named Wallace showed up at Marvin's office and said, "She did the same to me in 14. I was leaving my shift at the warehouse, got slammed against the hood because I didn't move fast enough. Never told anybody, didn't think it'd matter." Marvin listened, then paused. "Would you be willing to say that on record?" Wallace sighed. "You sure they'll listen?" "Now, we only need one truth to crack the surface," Marvin replied. "And this case? It's the crack." Meanwhile, Karen's world was shrinking. She couldn't go to her usual coffee shop without people glancing over their cups. At the grocery store, someone actually turned and walked away when she got in line behind them. A few neighbors kept their distance, pretending to be busy with their phones when she passed. At the station, she was met with silence. Officers she once laughed with now kept conversations short. Her locker had been moved to the far end of the room. She told herself it was temporary, that it would blow over. But deep down, she knew something had changed. She started avoiding mirrors. Every time she looked, she saw someone she didn't recognize. Someone cracking under pressure. That weekend, her brother called from Florida. She hadn't spoken to him in a year. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she answered quickly. "You sure?" "I saw your name online. It's politics. People looking to make noise." He was quiet for a second. "Just make sure you're telling the truth, Karen, because if you're not—" "I said I'm fine," she cut in. He didn't argue, just said goodbye and hung up. She tossed her phone onto the couch and sat down hard. The silence in her apartment was loud. Her mind drifted to Rena Blunt, the courthouse clerk. She'd caught her glancing too long the other day. Karen had clocked the look before, someone holding something. Maybe she knew. Maybe she had files, names, records. And if she did, Karen stood and poured herself a drink. She wouldn't go down over one traffic stop. She'd worked too long, sacrificed too much. Back at Marvin's office, Raina finished typing her signed affidavit. They added it to a growing folder labeled Roe v. Delacroix. By now they had statements from 3 men, Wallace, another warehouse worker, and a retired teacher, all describing nearly identical encounters with her over the past decade. "Still think we'll get access to that dash cam in time?" Derek asked. "We'll get it," Marvin said. "Judge signed the order yesterday. It'll be in court next week." And just like that, the focus shifted from words to evidence. Everyone in town was waiting, some to see a cop exposed, others hoping it all got swept under the rug. Karen sat in her cruiser outside the station the night before the hearing, watching the streetlights flicker. Inside the warehouse across the way, her heart beat heavy. She could still lie on the stand. She could twist it just enough. Maybe people would believe her. But then the dashcam footage arrived, and silence wasn't an option anymore. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it buzzed with quiet tension. Family, neighbors, reporters, and city employees filled the wooden benches, eyes fixed on the defense table where Derek sat, his hands folded, calm but unshakable. Marvin stood beside him, flipping through a thick stack of documents. Across the aisle, Officer Delacroix sat rigid in her uniform, lips pressed tight, eyes forward. Judge Bernice Lockwood entered with a bang of the gavel. "All rise, everyone stood. You may be seated." This wasn't the full trial, just the preliminary hearing to review evidence and determine whether charges would move forward. But everyone in that room knew it was more than that. This was about reputation, trust, history. Marvin stood and walked to the center. "Your Honor, the defense requests to begin with the dash cam footage from Officer Delacroix's cruiser. This footage directly contradicts the incident report filed against my client." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The room dimmed slightly as the screen lit up. The video began, audio clear, timestamp flashing in the corner, Derek's car, the flashing lights, Officer Delacroix's voice telling him to get out, her hands on her holster, her words clipped, tone escalating fast. Then came the shove. The courtroom watched in stillness as Karen pushed Derek against the hood. No sudden movement, no resistance. Just a man calmly asking a question. Then came the cuffs, then silence. When the footage ended, the judge turned to Karen. "Officer Delacroix, is this the interaction as you described it in your report?" Karen adjusted in her seat. "Not exactly, Your Honor, but in the moment." "Did the defendant raise his voice or lunge at you at any point?" "He questioned my authority. Did he resist?" Karen looked at Derek for the first time. He didn't flinch. "No," she admitted, "not physically." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Marvin rose again. "Your Honor, we also have 3 sworn affidavits from other men in this community who have had nearly identical encounters with Officer Delacroix. These incidents are not isolated misunderstandings. They are part of a pattern, and for years no one has had the means or the will to challenge them. Until now." He called Wallace to the stand. The man adjusted his tie and cleared his throat before speaking. "She pulled me over coming home from work, said I rolled through a stop sign. I didn't argue, just asked what I did. She made me get out, called backup, searched my car. Didn't find anything, but I got a citation anyway." Karen didn't look up. Then came the retired teacher, then the third man. Each story a variation of the same event. Karen stared ahead, eyes unfocused. Finally it was her turn. She took the stand slowly, swore her oath, sat down with her hands clutched in her lap. Marvin approached. "Officer Delacroix, how long have you been with the Macon Police Department?" 12 years. "In those 12 years, how many formal complaints have been filed against you?" 4, she said quietly. "Do you believe any of them were valid?" "No." "Even this one?" She hesitated. "I believed I was following protocol." "Do you now believe you were wrong?" She didn't answer right away. She glanced at the judge, then at Raina Blunt, sitting quietly near the back, then finally at Derek. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. Marvin leaned back slightly. "Thank you." The judge called for a recess. Outside, the air felt heavier than the heat. Reporters swarmed. Karen slipped out a side door with her lawyer. Derek stood on the courthouse steps, not speaking to the press, not celebrating, just breathing. Back inside, Judge Lockwood called the court back into session. "I've reviewed the footage, the testimonies, and the documentation. There is sufficient evidence to move forward with a full trial against Officer Delacroix for misconduct and falsifying a police report. The court is adjourned for today." The gavel struck. Karen stood up slowly. The badge on her chest suddenly felt too heavy. But the verdict wasn't the end. What came after would decide if anything really changed. The full trial didn't drag on. Once the footage went public, there was no stopping it. Local channels aired the clip on loop. National outlets picked it up within days. Karen Delacroix's name became shorthand for everything that had gone wrong with policing in towns like Macon. She was placed on unpaid suspension while the internal review began. Her union attorney kept talking about misinterpretation, emotional stress, and context, but no one was listening anymore. 3 weeks after the hearing, the courtroom filled again, this time for the verdict. Karen sat in plain clothes now, no badge, no uniform, just a blazer, a tight ponytail, and a pale expression that hadn't changed in days. Derek was there too, wearing the same calm, focused expression he had from day one. Raina sat behind him, Wallace too, a few others who'd come forward with her, quiet, present. The judge took less than 5 minutes to read the ruling. Officer Karen Delacroix was found guilty of misconduct in public office and falsifying a police report. She avoided jail time, but she was stripped of her badge and barred from holding any law enforcement position again. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She kept her eyes down and walked fast toward the parking lot, as if hoping no one would see her. But everyone did. Marvin patted Derek's back gently. "You did it." Derek didn't respond right away. He looked out at the cameras, the crowd, the people who'd finally started paying attention. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just didn't back down." That night, a local news crew aired a panel with legal experts. One of them called the case a wake-up call for smaller departments that think they're immune to accountability. Another warned that this one win doesn't erase the years of silence. Derek didn't watch it. He was back at his mother's house, sitting on the porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. She brought him a plate of buttered toast and sat next to him. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," he said, "but it's not really over, you know." His mother nodded. "It never is, but this time they had to look. They couldn't ignore you." He stared out at the street. A kid rode by on a bike, laughing with his friend. An older man walked a dog. Life kept moving, but it moved differently now. A week later, the city announced a review of all stops made by Officer Delacroix in the last 10 years. Internal Affairs sent notices to over 30 people who had filed past complaints. The mayor released a statement promising transparency, but Derek didn't care about promises. He wanted proof. So he filed a civil lawsuit, not for money, but for public record access. He wanted full transparency, names, documents, patterns. He wanted to make sure the next man didn't have to prove he belonged on a street he grew up on. Karen left town a month later. No official statement, no apology, just gone. Her house went up for sale quietly, her cruiser was auctioned off, her name slowly faded from the news cycle, but not from the town's memory. At a town hall 6 weeks later, Raina stood at the microphone and spoke for 3 minutes. No one should be scared to ask why they're being stopped. No one should have to prove they deserve respect. We can't undo the past, but we can stop repeating it. Applause broke out. It wasn't loud, but it was solid. Real. Later that night, Derek finally opened his inbox. Hundreds of messages from strangers, thanking him, sharing stories, asking for help. Some from Georgia, some from far away. He read each one, not because he wanted attention, but because every story reminded him why staying quiet had never been an option. And for the first time, the people who always got ignored were being heard. Months passed, the headlines moved on, the town did what towns do, kept going, kept working, kept pretending things were fine. But something had shifted. Quietly, in the spaces where people used to whisper. At Eastside High, a government teacher added Derek's case to her curriculum. At the barber shop, the younger crowd started listening more when the older heads talked about history. In the church bulletin, someone wrote, "There's power in your voice, even if you tremble when you use it." Derek didn't go back to Seattle right away. He stayed. He started showing up to city council meetings not to speak at first, just to observe. But eventually people started turning to him with questions. Could he look over a complaint? Could he help them write a letter? Could he teach them what he knew? So he did. Every Tuesday night at the community center, he ran a workshop, Know Your Rights. Word spread, attendance grew. Teenagers, seniors, single moms, even one off-duty cop, sitting in the back, quiet but present. One night, a 17-year-old named Keon asked him, "Didn't you want to give up at some point?" Derek paused, then said, "Yeah, a lot of points. But if I did, she'd still have her badge, and I'd still be wondering what might have happened if I hadn't said something." Keon nodded. "Guess we can't let stuff slide anymore, huh?" "No," Derek said. "Not anymore." Marvin came down from Augusta every few weeks. They still worked on the civil case, but mostly they talked about change, what it meant, what it really took. "It's not about punishing people," Derek said one night. "It's about making sure the truth has weight." Marvin raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be on your campaign posters." Derek laughed. "Don't even start." But truthfully, people had started asking about local office, about leadership, about what was next. He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew this wasn't the end. And somewhere in a small rented apartment 2 towns over, Karen Delacroix kept to herself. No job, no uniform, no spotlight. She'd applied for work in private security, but word followed her. Her name was a red flag now. What she used to wear with pride, her badge, was now the thing that closed every door. She watched one of Derek's workshops on YouTube, anonymously just once. She didn't comment, she didn't like or share, but she listened, and when he said, "Your silence is someone else's permission," she turned the video off and sat there for a long time. Not everyone gets redemption, not everyone asks for it, but the lesson didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to the town, to the kids growing up there, to the people who used to think they were alone, because truth doesn't need permission to matter, it just needs to be told. And when it's told out loud, when it's heard, believed, and backed up, it can change everything. The story of Derek Rowe and Karen Delacroix teaches us that truth, when spoken boldly, can dismantle even the most entrenched injustices. It reminds us that silence often shields wrongdoers, allowing patterns of abuse to persist unchallenged. Derek's refusal to stay quiet, despite the power of standing firm not just for oneself, but for those who've been ignored. Karen's downfall reveals that no badge, no authority, is above accountability when evidence and courage align. For the town of Macon, this wasn't just a trial, it was a mirror, forcing a community to confront its past and demand better. The lesson runs deeper than one case. Every voice matters, every story counts, and change begins when we choose to speak, even if our voices tremble. This story urges us all to question, to listen, and to act, because justice isn't given, it's claimed through persistent collective truth-telling. If you're watching this and you've ever been told to stay quiet, to let it go, or to keep your head down, don't. Your story matters. Speak it, share it, fight for it, even if your voice shakes. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, shared, and remembered, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's not just for the views. It's for giving a platform to people who've been silenced for too long.